All right, you cheeky cinnamon scrolls. That's it, you're in here now. You have to listen to me talk about David Bowie and prog rock for 45 minutes. Hi, I'm Johnny Galvatron. I'm the founder of Beethoven, Dinosaur, and I was the creative lead writer and composer of the Artful Escape. And I also voice a creature called Calvaggio who just screams. It's dope to be here. It's been a whole year since we released the Artful Escape. And today I wanted to talk to you about how it came about, what inspired it. We're going to talk about glam rock and psych rock and prog rock and stage personas and how the team at Beethoven and Dinosaur developed a visual style that Forbes called the most beautiful game of the year. This is what we're going to jam on. How your personal story can not only inspire a game's narrative, but also its visual design. How knowing your creative goals can steer you to specific subgenres and gameplay styles, helping you to define your visual and game direction, and how your gameplay goals can influence visual languages, the art and design of the Artful Escape, and the longest tracking shot ever, using your camera to evoke grandeur and emotion. So who am I? Johnny fucking Galvatron. To understand the artistic direction behind the Artful Escape, you must let me tell you about my mid-tier rock and roll career. I've been in bands all through high school. I wagged my year 12 maths exam to go be in a film clip for She Had. I don't know if anyone knows She Had. They're dope. They were my favorite band in the world. And my two loves were rock and roll and video games. And I finished my SAE 3D animation course, and then the week after that, I got a record deal with Warner Brothers, and I just never came home. I kind of signed one of the last big record deals in the traditional industry before it was dragged unwillingly into the age of streaming. And then my first tour was with She Had, with the band that I had wagged to go and see. This was like a time of transition for the music industry, and looking back, like our goals and our fantasies were kind of locked in a time that had already passed us by. This is what I looked like back in the day. Look at that young face. Now look at my face. That's what video game development does to you. And drugs. Which one am I? I'm definitely the third one. So I toured for 5 years or 6 years, and I played everything from 5 people at the Seddon pub, and they threw rocks at us because they thought we looked like Poison. And sometimes I played the biggest stages and festivals in the world. I drank with my heroes. I was in Rolling Stone. I got to say, I'm Johnny Galvatron, and you're watching Rage, 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 Rage. That's me at somewhere, St Kilda Fest, and that's me playing Cheap. How's my hair? It's amazing. That's me playing Cheap Trick's 5-neck guitar when I was on tour with them. Those were the days. I know they weren't. You hated it. That's right, Slide. I really hated it. I've been in bands. Oh, you hated it. Yeah, that's right. I hated it. The reality of mid-tier bands is that you make no money. And you rough it, and you live in a 12-seater bus, and you're never home, and you're always drunk, and the rock and roll dream loses its shine pretty quick. At least it did for me. I like being at home. My band fell apart like countless bands before it, and the exact blueprint that bands use to fall apart. We had fallen short of the lofty goals set for us, and by the end of it, music was poison in my mouth, and I promised to never leave the house again. And then I wrote a novel, and I showed it to no one, and then at some point I decided to make a small, easy-to-manufacture iPad app. That was generally considered a terrible decision. The app quickly became something called the Artful Escape of Francis Vendetti. It's not an app, but like a 5-hour adventure that would end up sending me across the world again, costing millions of dollars, and be translated into over 20 languages, and have Hollywood stars playing leading roles, and won a flippin' BAFTA. Now, Beethoven and Dinosaur, we got our publishing deal just next door at PAX here in Melbourne, Rock City. And I'm sure some of you are looking to pitch your games or get a publishing deal. So I'll just do a recap of how that went down, just quickly, before we get into stuff. I downloaded Unreal Engine. It's free. And I learned off YouTube. And then I made a little video with just some kind of art tests. And I sent that to Epic. And I was like, is this the kind of thing you would be interested for your mega grants? No in-between email. They just sent me $20,000. That was it. Just Tim Sweeney, just throwing out the cash. Thanks, Tim. Some people, have mixed feelings about Epic, but I fucking don't. And we did a Kickstarter, and it didn't do very well. We built no kind of audience at all. I just put it up and be like, dig my weird guitar stuff. But as the Kickstarter fizzled out, we got contacted by Annapurna Interactive, who I really wanted to get a publishing deal with. And one day Nathan Gary, who's the head of Annapurna, now the head of Annapurna General, rang me up and said, are you going to be at PAX? Are you going to have a table there? And I was like, yeah, Nathan, no probs. We've got a table. We've got a demo ready to go. That was bullshit. And we had 3 months. So in 3 months, we put a demo together. I used the last favors I had of my mid-tier rock and roll career and got a table. We'd been up for 48 hours when they rocked up. They rocked up at 10:30 a.m. on the first day, played the game, took me out for foe, and victory. That's how we got our publishing deal. What is the Artful Escape? Yeah, look at all those awards. Check it out.
We ain't got much time.
No, I'm a professional, don't worry. So what is the Artful Escape? The Artful Escape is a 2.5D platformer musical action-adventure game released around this time last year. Published by Annapurna Interactive, it's about a teenage guitar prodigy called Francis Vendetti as he struggles with the legacy of his famous folk uncle, the expectations of his hometown, and hoping to escape the musical shadow of his uncle. Francis embarks on a psychedelic adventure to inspire his stage persona. It's kind of like if David Bowie went on a journey and came back as Ziggy Stardust. That's the game, if you haven't played it. Now that nonsense is out of the way, let's move on. So, how your personal story can not only inspire a game's narrative, but also its visual style. At some point along the development of the Artful Escape, I decided I wanted it to be about teenage dreams of rock and roll and success and fame. I wanted the antithetical of my own experience in rock and roll. I wanted to encapsulate the joy and innocent imagination, the fantasy of some musical prowess that could open up a world unseen to the naked eye. I'd fallen out of love with rock and roll, but it seemed the fantasy of rock and roll was something that enthralled me still. It wasn't necessarily the fantasy of lifestyle, but the fantasy contained within the artistic output of many of my heroes. Not only of their music, but the satellite aspects of their creative mediums. And we'll come back to that. I wanted to make a music game, but I didn't want it to be a music game. Because music games, generally, I like music games, rhythm games, but they generally don't feel like playing music to me. When you go on tour, you know your songs so well, it's really effortless. And you're not kind of like waiting for the notes to fly at you as you're playing live. When you've played it enough, you don't even think about it. Like Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana, not a hard song to play. But when you play it, it feels like you're shifting the foundations of the earth. This is a key element in the Artful Escape. Francis Vendetti, the protagonist, is a prodigal guitar player. He is already a master. Crucially, the game is not about him becoming a better musician. The game is about fantasy, creativity. It's about making a stage persona. The sprawling and intricate nonsense artists build to elevate their music, like placing a diamond in a precious setting. Stage personas and design. So, let's talk about the satellite creative aspects of an artist's core medium. The world's artists build around their primary art. And let's use a familiar example. This is David Bowie. Now, Bowie wasn't the first to use a stage persona, like not by a long way. He himself was inspired by other stage oddities like legendary Stardust Cowboy and Captain Beefheart. Any Captain Beefheart fans in the crowd? Yeah, sick! There's never usually any, so stoked. But Bowie's creation, Ziggy Stardust, is one of the most recognisable. The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars came out in 1972, which is coincidentally the same year that Artful Escape is set. And it's up there with Pink Floyd and the Beatles as one of the most revered concept albums of the 20th century. A concept album is an album that contains within it a traditional narrative or theme carried through the music, the imagery, and often the performances as well. It also predicted Kanye West, which is amazing. Famously, Bowie's Ziggy Stardust was a musical bisexual alien sent to Earth to comfort humanity in the last 5 years before it is apocalyptically destroyed. The album finishing with Ziggy Stardust dying on stage. Our focus was not on Francis Vendetti's core medium, his guitar playing and his music. Our focus was on he surrounds that music with, the satellite aspects of his creative persona. This was a pivotal decision in the direction of the game. Our protagonist would need to be someone who could not perform as themselves, someone who needed a disguise to tell the truth about themselves. So Francis Vendetti became the nephew of a legendary folk singer, with a whole town of friends and family expecting him to follow in the same folky footsteps. The story begins at a festival celebrating the 20th anniversary of his uncle's most famous album. And Francis is a boy with a weight of expectations he can never possibly meet. So our protagonist was going to create a stage persona to escape the shadow of his uncle. This is Calypso. It's very pretty. Knowing this, we could seek out inspiration for the music, art style, and level design. The realm of concept albums, stage personas, and rock operas became our guide, and we drew on a wealth of artistic plunder in which to craft our game. What elements broadly make up a concept album and stage persona outside of the music and performance? And how did we apply them to our design? So there's the fashion, very important, the narrative, the imagery, and the rumours. Let's start with fashion. Ziggy, you cheeky bugger. Stage costumes of the 70s and 80s are dope. Check them out. So cool. They can be expression of the music or the musicians themselves, a statement against authority, players in a grander narrative, or just be like really fabulous. Our creative process had led us here to the wardrobes of the era's biggest performers. Ziggy was a master of fashion and design, drawing inspiration from Kensai Yamamoto for his famous bright red mullet hairstyle. And you can even like go online and like look up the exact way to color your hair like that and how Bowie did it. It's like an icon. He would later hire Yamamoto himself to create some of his most famous stage outfits. Ziggy's mullet would become the height of 70s fashion, with Bowie himself saying, the Ziggy cut became in hairdressing in the early 70s what the Lady Di cut was for the early 80s, only with double the appeal because it worked for both sexes. The Washington Post described Ziggy as glam's principal architect. So on our journey across time, space, and the cosmic extraordinary, Francis wouldn't be dressed like this. He wouldn't be like really hardcore. I think that's a mashup. He'd be dressed more like Freddie Mercury and Rod Stewart and Ziggy. And he ended up looking like this. He wears like a spandex suit that kind of glitters, extremely glam. And we took a lot of that inspiration into our customization, which gets super glam. And we wanted to be extreme and gender bending and just super glam, you know? Glam attire is punctuated by form-fitting cuts, extravagant face makeup, frills, sequins, lights, wigs, sometimes even formal attire. We tried to encapsulate an era of theatrical costumes, making them available to the player within an 80s mall, in a cupboard, on a boat. This also led us to create a whole world in the Artful Escape dedicated to fashion. And it's a world called Glimmerdim. Glimmerdim is made up of twin cities that the player traverses on their artistic journey and where Francis crafts his stage persona. The first city is called Beige. Beige is a featureless, monolithic, brutalist megacity surrounded by an impenetrable wall. Row after row of identical buildings stand like solemn soldiers. And we imagine Beige as an isolated, authoritarian state. No colour was allowed, no texture, pattern or form. Home to a persecuted populace under a regime that allowed nothing of beauty and extravagance. We used basic brutalist shapes, a dull colour palette, and a thick fog that gave the scene an eerie uniformity or anonymity. And when Francis arrives in Beige, it's abandoned. And a neon prawn tells him the Glimmerdimmerians, which is super fun to say, have moved on, but there was a clue to the city's abandonment in the centre of town. When we first meet Frida and Caravaggio, Frida is stealing a red feather from atop a sombre monument, and exploring the backstory of Glimmerdim and Beige, we came up with the idea that a red feather had floated over the wall. And once discovered, the feather caused a psychedelic rebellion against the status quo. With their minds expanded by the sight of colour, the Glimmerdimmerians abandoned the brutalism of Dim and trekked across the desert to build a new city and a new home called Glimmer. And this is Glimmer. Glimmer is awash with colour. It's got curving forms, it's bathed in light from the streets below and walls of neon advertising. They pride themselves as a mecca of fashion and flair. But the Glimmerdimmerians have fallen into the same trap as their ancestors. They have replaced a rigid structure of brutalism with a rigid structure of colour and form. They are isolationist. There's fashion police that appear in the game, and they have fashion laws of the state, and the denizens dress in an almost identical fashion. The only way to escape Glimmerdim is to cause another cultural revolution. And after the player creates their new stage persona, Francis shreds across the rooftops of the futuristic city, and his daring appearance, crafted by the player, causes the general populace to freak out and revolt, and Francis becomes the red feather of Glimmer, just like Ziggy Stardust had been the red mullet of the 70s. Francis escapes stealing a turtle that travels between dimensions. That's the kind of game it is. So, what had fashion given us? It had given us our character's hero costume, customization options, an essential portion of the character's journey, level concepts and design, narrative and lore. And that's just kind of like drawing from our core of stage personas, and it just influenced such a large portion of the game. Narrative. It's a terrifying image, as Pink Floyd. An integral part of the concept album and stage personas is the narrative that drives them. In Ziggy Stardust's 1972 narrative, he's an alien sent to Earth to comfort humanity in the last 5 years of its existence. The youth of the world hear him on the radio. As he approaches, humanity latches on to Ziggy, and soon he becomes worshipped as a messiah, ultimately getting torn apart on stage by his fans in the song Rock and Roll Suicide. Other famous examples include Pink Floyd's The Wall, the story of a depressed rock star who recounts his past tragedies, each one described as another brick in the wall. He builds a metaphorical wall around himself, and the album deals with isolation and abandonment, loosely based on the members of Pink Floyd. There's also Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles, Beyonce's Lemonade, it's a dope concept album, and The Who's Tommy. We wanted Francis and the player to be able to craft a story within a story, to have some hand in shaping the narrative that would accompany Francis's persona. We used several different styles of gameplay and storytelling to create this story. So the idea of narrative, just like fashion, inspired us to make a world hungry for narrative. The denizens of the Heliotroms feed on stories, exaggeration and fantasy. And in the snow of the Heliotroms, Francis built his alter ego's backstory. He chooses his name. We allowed the player to write in their own persona name. Now, this led to a lot of players naming themselves inappropriately. It's a lot of dicks. But they put that on Twitter, and then more people played the game, so that was fine, I guess. But the players who named themselves with their adventures in mind hopefully gained some of the attachment to the story that followed. The name follows you. It becomes part of a legend that eventually appears written across the stars. Now, the Artful Escape is fully voiced, so like, how do you write in your own name if everything's fully voiced? Well, we just put a little guitar shred in there anytime the name's mentioned. So they'll be like, oh, it's so good to see you. Super cheap option. Don't get AI or anything, just put in a little guitar solo. Another super cheap option, give everyone sunglasses. And then when the press ask you about it, be like, oh, it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for what people have to hide and the masks we all wear. But it's just so you don't have to fucking do the eyes. I like to apologize to all the press that I said that to. Large portions of the Heliotron is dedicated to another musician in the Cosmic Extraordinary, Lightman, who acts as Francis's patron, guide, mentor, and ultimately antagonist. Spoilers. We tell Lightman's story in the form of a museum, spread out across the snow, holograms lying in disrepair, each exhibit voiced unwillingly by Lightman's first mate, who's played by Jason Schwartzman. I'm just going to quickly tell a Jason Schwartzman story. I'm going to diverge from the script. He was dope. He came into the recording studio and he had like a little umbrella and a little synth and a hat and a cape and stuff. And then I was like, try the line this way. And he'd do it. And then I'd be like, yeah, try the accent on this other word. And he'd flick the cape back and then put the hat on and do the umbrella and do the line a different way. It was amazing. I have no idea where I am now, so just bear with me. We tell Lightman's story in the form of this museum and Lightman's fictional backstory, from being found floating in a starbeam to jamming with the most spectacular creature in the universe, the Glamorgon. These areas were designed not only to detail Lightman's backstory, but also teach and inspire the creation of fictional backstories for supplementary personas in the player. We also wanted the player to pick their home planet. This was in the form of like a scroll-through menu, which doesn't sound very exciting, but it works really well in the game. It's kind of like establishing shots from like, I don't know, J.J. Abrams' Star Trek film has like the planet, and it says Vulcan. I love Star Trek. And the planets, and it'll give you a little bit of information about the planet, and so you could help make a choice. So this is Garmoth. It's a world of aluminium towers, colossal stadiums, and crystal bridges all ringing in the key of A. Or Von Deladon. It's renowned for fireworks, starships, and romantic novelettes. Or Galaxram, brewers of milk that transport all consumers to a Manchester dance party in September 1987. And people asked me why it was then. It was like, because I think that's when you would have the most, like, highest chance of running into New Order in some Manchester dance club. Backstory. After picking his home planet, Francis is transported to a late-night talk show where a creepy host asks him a series of surreal and detailed questions. I learned from one of my favorite games, Kentucky Route Zero, that stories and poems can be told in dialogue options. And this is us at our most literary in the game. So again, it's like a fun little sidestep from our central gameplay. The player eventually chooses their backstory, and portions of that appear throughout the game. The goal was to give the player a sense of ownership and attachment to Francis's creative self, because in these sections of gameplay, the player is not controlling Francis's body. They're controlling Francis's imagination. So, just from our pillar of narrative that I got from David Bowie, gave Francis a moldable backstory and a name, fleshed out the backstories of supporting characters, an essential portion of the character's journey, level concept and design, and again, narrative and lore. Imagery. This is Parliament. That's such an amazing picture. Bowie has some iconic imagery. The lightning bolt, the golden circle on his forehead, his surreal album covers, each one a touchstone for the evolution of his stage personas. The music I wrote with my musical partner Josh Abrahams was something a lot more prog rock and guitar driven than Bowie. The game is basically one enormous tracking shot from right to left. And we wanted these alien landscapes to match the tone of our score. So here's an example. This is the theme for the Ruby Cola, a track that Josh and I wrote. And it's always weird in talks when someone puts music on and just stands here. So I'm just going to put it on, and then I'm going to hide behind the podium. Pump it up. No, sorry, I gotta keep going. I only got 45 minutes. That's a dope track that I wrote. That's dope. It's sort of like a synth bed. It's like kind of an orchestral seasoning with acoustic drums with like there's nonsense guitar solos over the top in game. So it's kind of prog rock, kind of Steve Vai. And it's grand, but still a little bit cheesy, which is kind of where I live. It's a sort of Rick Wakeman, Jeff Wayne kind of jam artists who have both made outlandish concept albums. Yeah. Feel free to yell yeah at any time, by the way. If I have any cool references that you're into, I'd love to hear it. This is Roger Dean. Dean was famous for the AIGEA and Yes albums. Just checking. In the 70s and 80s and did a lot of dope sci-fi work throughout his career. His work depicts alien worlds, strange rock formations, distant glowing cities, and all manner of alien wildlife. Science fiction rears its head all over glam rock, prog rock, and concept albums, from Bowie's Starman aesthetic to George Clinton in Parliament touring with a massive UFO on stage, which is now in the Smithsonian. And recently, like Daft Punk, Lady Gaga, Grimes, there's a lot of acts that use sci-fi into their stage personas. As you can imagine, our glam prog rock game is filled to the brim with science fiction imagery, flying saucers, spaceships, bodysuits, alien creatures, cosmic nebulas, and doorways to other worlds. I was heavily influenced by one particular film, which is Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and it's the basis of the musical call and response jams in the game. And in the finale of the film, spoilers here if you haven't seen it, a synthesizer communicates with an alien mothership using musical tones. It's epic. It's my favorite ending to a film ever. Also, it's a weird film. Like, Richard Dreyfuss is in it, but like, you shouldn't even really be in it. It's just like, what is your character doing? Remove all the Richard Dreyfuss scenes, and it's the best movie ever. Rumors. That's a joke. Thank you. You got to throw in some Fleetwood Mac. Bowie was famous for his life off stage as well as on. He dined in the finest restaurants and drove everywhere in limousines, even though he was broke and couch surfing. It can be one of the more lighthearted and extravagant areas of the stage persona, the artistic, fictional world encroaching on reality. But it can also be heavy, and some people believe a David Bowie concert was one of the ignition points of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Publicity and press are symbiotic with the rock and roll star. There's all manner of famous rock publicity stunts. Bowie appearing in character as Ziggy in his press conferences, Ozzy Osbourne biting the head off a dove, or Michael Jackson floating a 30-foot tall statue of himself down the Thames. One of my faves. Francis needed to get some publicity if he was going to achieve his spectacular goals. So we developed the world of Hyperion because Francis needed some hype. The denizens of Hyperion tune into something called the Zapposphere, which is a bunch of radio stations and updates about what's cool. And what's cool in the Zapposphere is designated cool enough to jam with the Glamagon, the most spectacular creature in the cosmic extraordinary. And this is Francis Vendetti's goal. Francis does some radio interviews. He does a meet and greet with fans where he gets the picture taken with them. These aren't like hard gameplay sections, but I think there's like a fun switch up of like getting photos with your fans. And these scenes also gave Francis's career a sense of progression from the start of the game. But now Francis needed a big publicity stunt. So we designed something as grandiose as Michael Jackson's Thames stunt. We had Francis appear in the head of a creature that only appears once every 10,000 years, and it carried him through a psychedelic jungles of Hyperion. It kind of looked like this. And this is how he gets his shot with the glamour gun. That's enough of that. Zeroing in on a niche aspect of your story, in this case Francis building his glam rock stage persona, guided us. It allowed us to delve through a rich source of history, art, music and inspiration, influencing everything from our narrative to our sets, to our landscapes and even our characters. Find your niche. Art style. I'm gonna play this again, but I'm gonna turn it down. I just wanted to show the awards again. The art style of the Artful Escape was not something dictated strongly in a visual Bible or adhered to some detailed version from conception. Our visual style evolved from experimentation, iteration, and blending of several different styles. The most significant change was when I got the money to hire extremely talented artists. Alec Ardenbeckwith, Mikey McCusker, Tessa Monash, and Harry Truman, not the president. He's like a 24-year-old man from Brisbane who likes bouldering. The art style is best described as molded 2D characters and assets, beautifully illustrated, placed in a 3D environment, and lit with a combination of traditional game lighting and theatre lighting. Initially, before we got our publishing deal, I myself did all the art and animation, and the Artful Escape began looking like this. I'm going to show you, and I'm going to do my first ever director commentary over the top. There was no reason for me to include the Unreal Engine logo. I just thought it looked more professional. And obviously I just spent way too much time on the B&D logo thingy as well. There it is. This is how it originally looked. And damn, at the time I thought that was cool. He's got a tumbler nose, if anyone knows that reference. Oh, look at those trees. Not very good. Not very good. I don't know if many people here use Unreal Engine. Ample use of simple grass wind happening pretty much on everything. That's not in the game. That's not in the game. This woman never made it into the game, although I think she's pretty cool. Look how floaty it is. This is my actual reactions right now. This bit looks alright. I'm pretty happy with that. And this is what I initially sent to Epic. Oh, look at that. UI design. What was I thinking? We were going to have like an amp that flew out of the ground. That wasn't in the game. I don't think you can climb. You can't climb. Can you, Jack? You can't climb in the game. We did do that bit. So much simple grass wind. This character never appears anywhere in the game. But as you can see, the art style went a long way. Look at that. I mean, that's just a random particle just sitting in space. And the game was called, at the time, the game was called The Artful Escape of Francis Vendetti. And the publisher was like, that's too fucking long. It needs to just be The Artful Escape. Now, at the time, I thought that was super dope. These 2D cards placed in 3D space, but I knew it was lacking something. It was lacking better art, animation, and 3D sculpting. But there was one crucial thing. I fucking love rim lights. Flat cards can only do catch light from front on. And it's hard to add drama to them, and it makes assets stand sometimes unnaturally in their surroundings. Our animator, Tess Monash, felt the same way, made a process for popping our characters and assets, allowing them to catch the light in 3D space. Is anyone here Tess Monash? Yes, sick. Hi, Tess. So Tess goes into detail about this in her talk, 2D or Not 2D by Tess Monash, and that's the link. And it's way more involved, and it's really good professional. It's got less swearing, and it's a great talk, and you should definitely check it out. But I'm going to run over the process quickly. First, you must design the crusto. This is a creature I designed for the beaches of Glimmerdim. It's a crabby crustacean creature that inflates and floats away when you shred near it. Next, I gave the sketch to Arden, our talented illustrator, and I gave her a series of detailed notes such as, could you make this better and like this, but good? I'll also tell her where the creature is, what it should be doing, how I imagine its disposition and its characteristics. And Tessa Monash has many videos of me being a goonbag in front of the camera, pretending to shred or be animals, and she often blackmails me with them. Arden creates these beautifully illustrated versions of my concept, designed and completed with the intention of breaking apart each asset of the character into a texture sheet. Arden used inspiration from James Jean and Mobius. Who doesn't love Mobius? You know, Mobius is dope. So it's separated into all its crabby parts. And also I found Arden Beckwith on illustrators.com. Like miracle, she didn't even have an art station. So check out illustrators.com. There might be some more diamonds in the rough there. So this is what it gets turned into, which is just a texture sheet of every part. And this is Tess working in real time to cut out all the different parts. She would subdivide each area into the required topology depending on how the piece was meant to be animated. For example, areas that bend require more topology on the crease, stuff like that. Using that topology, Tess would then pop the model, sculpting it into a semi-3D space. Here you can see the crusty crab popped and assembled and ready for rigging. We rigged characters in Maya using a traditional 3D workflow, drawing in the skeleton and painting weights on the mesh. And for our more detailed creatures, Tess developed extremely detailed rigs akin to what you might see in regular 3D characters that allowed us to imbibe creatures with a gamut of emotions. Yeah? Is that right? Sick, yeah. Tess would then bake out animations and we'd test them in level. It's always an important process to determine the scale of the creatures and their placements in the level. Next step, we would finish the animation and throw it in game, and this is the finished animation. And after that, it looks like this. Bloop, 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 bloop. So this process allowed us to give full illustrative control to Arden, but then allow us the asset to be capable of catching 3D light. Rigged and animated as a 3D character, giving our scenes more cohesion, allowing us to hide the seams between what was 2D and what was 3D, and allowed us a new level of atmosphere and drama. Environments. We use this process of popping on all the characters and creatures, as well as a lot of larger flora, trees and shrubbery, stuff like that. Anything that we wanted to catch the light. This is the heliotroms. And this is a kind of a look behind the curtain. You can see it's a 3D landscape, but it's filled with these kind of 2D popped assets. And anything that there's like a path the character runs through, and it's surrounded on either side, kind of in the foreground and the background, by arrangements of popped 2D assets. And some of them, like this little shrub here, they're just straight 2D. And this allowed us to kind of give a great sense of depth and artistry in these scenes. And we also added like fog cards to give various different senses of depth or atmosphere. And this is the crab you go around, many crab-based creatures. And you can see how it's put together here in the 2.5D sense. There it is. I don't know how long this talk is, so I'll probably just keep leaving it. It was a simple concept, but when executed well, can make something really magical, and we're really proud of the Artful Escape's visuals. Camera. A big part of the Artful Escape's look is its animated camera that moves relative to the player. The game is essentially one giant tracking shot from left to right, and we drew a lot of inspiration from directors who utilize these shots, like Spielberg does heaps of Wonders, and of course Wes Anderson, who famously uses extended, almost cartoon-like tracking shots. Camera tracking gives a tremendous sense of depth, giving definition between the foreground, the midground, and the background. And as a side-scrolling game, lends itself to creating a rich, deep scene. Here's it in action. Unlike 3D game worlds, you, as the director... Whoa! Sometimes I just rock out, just instantly. You, as the director, are in control of the camera. You can use this advantage to utilize cinematic language, such as bringing the camera close to depict more personal moments or more claustrophobic environments. You can pull the camera away to make the hero feel more isolated or to reveal the grandeur of a vista. And you can see in these shots the camera just kind of pulling in, pulling out, and just moving around in a kind of very smooth, dreamy way. We used a camera point system that allowed us to give commands to the camera via the character movement across a spline dotted with control points. So it was like a spline that ran across the whole level, and these different little points where we could give access to the camera position, the camera depth, the camera depth from the player character, the field of view, and some other little controllers like grain and vignette if we wanted them. Now it leads me to creatures. I got asked literally thousands of questions over the press run of the Artful Escape, but one stands out to me. I want to tell it to you. A young girl, I think she was the daughter of the interviewer, had recorded a question for me, and it went like this. I've written it out as said. Why does Francis, why doesn't he have a little sword or anything to kill the monsters? And I love that question. Because it tells you a lot about the philosophical decisions we made about the game. Francis does not need to kill to be creative, and Francis does not need to die to be creative. It wasn't a game that lent itself to violence and carnage. So with fighting and explosions out of the question, how are we going to interact with the creatures of the Artful Escape? Through musical jams. This is where my love of Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind came in. And as I mentioned earlier, the finale of that film depicts a synthesizer communicating with the mothership via a tonal musical language. And we developed a kind of call and response musical system. Our version of the tonal language revolved around a musical key that resembled the 5 buttons of the gamepad or the controller. Looks like this. So, when designing creatures, they could be intimidating but never threatening. They could also be impossible. They must contain, or some of them, the ones that you jam with, contain the musical key in a readable form, and matching the theatrical, elevated prog rock world. So these are some of our designs. In the top left there is a monkey bird creature called Troms, who has jetpacks, and you jam with her, and she has the musical key incorporated in her face. And in the top right corner is a neon jam shrimp, who you run into in Glimmerdim, and obviously has the musical key depicted in its head. And then there's other creatures who would just be kind of part of the landscape, like our trumpet frogs in the bottom right-hand corner. This game's really purple. I think the frogs, by the time we got to the frogs, that was like at the end of our run, and we really knew how to put them together. I really love the trumpet frogs. I think they're fantastic. So, this is the end of my talk. I've done it. I can already taste the beer. I'm about to go have at lunchtime. So in summary, your own story can influence not only a game's narrative, but also its visual style and design choices. Creative goals can push you towards niche subgenres, helping you to define your game in visual direction. Your game goals and philosophies and philosophies behind them can steer your design and visual languages. Pop stuff out, it catches light better, listen to David Bowie, dress like Prince, Make everyone wear sunglasses. Thanks a lot. And you can ask some questions if you want to get all the way up at the front on the mic, or you can just yell them out. I'm fine with that. Jack, anything? Thanks, mate. Fuck no.
What's next?
Gonna make another one. I can't tell you about it yet. It's on the hush hush. But we're Beethoven Dinosaur, almost the same team, is making another game, and it'll be crazy in music and cool. Thanks, everyone. Oh, you got a question? Yeah, throw it out.
One of the most amazing things about the game, Johnny, which absolutely slaps, is how well you seem to balance challenge with being present in this place. And this feeling of mastery of shredding and just like rolling along and sort of almost like when you hit special in Tony Hawk Pro Skater.
Yeah. Sure. Yep.
Just how challenging does this thing need to be, and how and where does that actually infringe on that idea of just being a badass rockstar?
Yes, being a badass rockstar was definitely the plan. I often reference the Arkham games, the Batman games, because when you fight in Batman, it's kind of easy and you feel like a badass. And I wanted to have that kind of reference in the guitar playing. I wanted you to not be able to mess up. I wanted to feel like you had complete mastery of the guitar and the music. And the way we did that was, it was kind of a miracle that we pulled it off, really. We did it quickly for the original demo, which was creating the score beneath everything and keeping it in a similar key. And then we'd get our guitarist, Eden Altman, to shred over the top for like hours. And then we would cut those little bits and put them together. And the reason it kind of works together is because of this Dark Side of the Rainbow thing. I don't know if you know Dark Side of the Rainbow, but if you play Dark Side of the Moon on the third roar of the MGM line at the start of The Wizard of Oz, it's meant to line up. And so we have this amorphous music system that you can play guitar at any time, and it should work. And so if it sounds good to you, it's because your brain made it sound good, put together itself. And I think that's one portion of the gameplay. And then you have a whole bunch of other clubs in your bag, which are like, the narrative, the visuals. And it's kind of like a polyrhythmic system, which is like polyrhythmic things are different beats playing at different speeds, and sometimes they line up together. And that's that kind of crescendo that you can hit when playing these guitars, and the narrative and everything sits together. So I think it was about finding a musical pacing throughout the game where those polyrhythmic sections could line up when we wanted them to. And I've really gone a long way around that question. I've completely forgotten what the original one was, but I hope that answers it. Sick, thanks, man. Yo. Yep.
Not really a question, just saying I want the game on Steam.
Yeah, sick, man. Thanks a lot. I owe you a beer.
I wanted to say, very much like the person behind me, I'm definitely keen to buy this thing at home. So having not played it yet, to achieve that polymorphic effect, did you use like a lot of layering in your music?
Yeah, well, I think usually we would just try and have, there's different settings. So you would have a core soundtrack at the bottom, which is like the one I played earlier, which is very kind of synthy and doesn't always necessarily have a strong rhythm. And then you would have various other things that you could light up when you were shredding. So there would be like, the plants would have different sounds, the creatures would have different sounds, and they need to be like work in a polyrhythmic way as well. So you have to approach every piece of sound design, and every sound that's going to play has to be in key and has to be able to play at any time and still be musically acceptable. So yeah, there's a lot of layers. All the sound design is in key. So yeah, there's tons of stuff going on musically. Yes, sick. Yeah, it's the best.
I was curious, as a composer myself, I'm curious what engine you use, or did you create a bespoke musical engine?
We were thinking of using Fmod, and then we hated ourselves, so we didn't use it and just made life really hard for ourselves because we didn't use it. We should have used Fmod. We didn't. We just used Unreal Engine 4 stock standard. Terrible decision. Don't follow in our footsteps. Yo.
This is probably a predictable question, but you mentioned polyrhythm so much, I got to ask, how much was Tool in it?
I do love Tool. I've seen Tool a bunch of times. I'm not good enough to make Tool music. So it didn't influence me too much because I just ain't got those Tool chops, you know what I mean? I'd rather just do some wavy synth stuff, call it a day. But that's dope. Am I done? I'm done, everyone. Stay metal.